This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Trump ally lays bricks in Jewish West Bank community. Does it signal a change in U.S. policy toward settlements? Plus, President Trump offers to talk with Iranian leaders. What's next? And CBN founder Pat Robertson honored as longtime friend of Zion. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl, filling in for Chris Mitchell. The Trump White House is working on its peace plan between Israel and the Palestinians. And though there's been a lot of speculation about what that plan includes, it hasn't been made public. So when Trump ally Mike Huckabee showed up to celebrate a Jewish building project on the disputed West Bank, quite a few people took notice. John Waggy explains from Efrat, south of Jerusalem.
I'm building because, I may want to one day purchase a holiday home here in Efrat.
Former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee is a veteran visitor to Israel, and this week he was invited to take part in a building ceremony in Efrat, capital of Judea, one of the largest clusters of Jewish communities in what the world calls the West Bank. To much of the world, this Jewish neighborhood under construction in Efrat is just another West Bank settlement and a target to be boycotted. But for the thousands of Jews who live here, this is the heart of Judea, very much a part of biblical Israel. As he put down some mortar on one of the 900 new homes in Efrat, Huckabee made the case that what's being built here is a bridge for peace.
Every day, 1,300 Palestinian workers come to job sites here. They earn money for their families. And they don't just earn pocket change, they earn significantly better money than they would anywhere else.
Efrat is located south of Jerusalem and north of the Arab city of Hebron, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are buried. Efrat's mayor, Oded Ravivi, thanked President Trump for his support of Israel and invited him to come and see for himself how Jews and Arabs live together in Judea and Samaria, despite the global boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement.
One visit here tells you the essence of the Jewish people, the essence of the Jewish history, the essence of the importance of the Jewish people building their lives here.
Before he left Efrat, a reporter asked Huckabee how his faith shaped his views on the West Bank, the land promised to Israel in the Bible.
I'm a Christian, so I'm not a Jew. But I also believe that if those promises which were made to the Jewish people are no longer valid, then why would I believe any promise that I would believe God would make to me would be valid?
John Waggy, CBN News, Efrat.
Turning north toward Syria, Israel said it killed 7 terrorists armed with automatic weapons and explosive belts just 650 feet from the Israeli security fence on the Golan Heights. The IDF released this footage of the 7 as it was tracking them, and the IDF searches of the area the next day. The army believes the terrorists were part of an ISIS group routed by Syria and were on their way to carry out an attack against Israel. Earlier, Syria said it had completely ousted ISIS rebels from the Syrian Golan Heights, but civilians there fear a massacre by President Bashar Assad's forces. Assad now controls the Golan border with Israel for the first time in 7 years. And as fighting raged in the southern town of Dara, there are reports Israel has asked Russia to prevent the slaughter of Assad's opponents. Israel evacuated hundreds of White Helmet humanitarian workers and their families earlier this month, but hundreds more were left behind. One worker told reporters, "Our fate is worse than that of army defectors." With the first U.S. sanctions against Iran in place, the economy in Iran has already been hit. That's caused growing fears of prolonged economic suffering. More sanctions covering other types of commerce, including oil purchases, takes effect on November 4th. CBN's George Thomas has more.
Iran's economy is in a freefall, and pressure on average citizens to make ends meet is growing by the day.
Iran at the moment is in a difficult condition, especially economic conditions.
Thousands of protesters angry about soaring inflation and skyrocketing prices took to the streets of Isfahan in central Iran on Tuesday, chanting, "Where is our money? Shame on you," and "Death to high prices."
Its currency is collapsing quite rapidly. Internal dissent is growing.
Nearly 40 years after the Islamic uprising, many in Iran and in the West say the regime's campaign to spread its revolutionary version of Islam has yielded only heartache and suffering.
The 40 years of fruit from the revolution has been bitter. 40 years of kleptocracy. 40 years of the people's wealth squandered on supporting terrorism. 40 years of ordinary Iranians thrown in jail for peaceful expression of their rights.
Months after the U.S. withdrew from the nuclear deal, Iran is about to get hit with even more crippling sanctions, further damaging the economy and exerting more pressure on the regime.
It was the Obama policies that emboldened the Iranians to finance terror. Trump, by placing new sanctions and reversing the nuclear deal, has made it so that the Iranian economy is in big trouble. And the Iranian people are protesting, saying, why are you giving our money to the Palestinians when we are in economic desperate straits at home? And this could bring about the downfall of the regime, which would be good for the Iranians and good for the world.
President Trump on Monday said he'd meet with Iranian President Hassan Rouhani any time if the Iranian leader was willing.
Iranian officials are trying to find out what President Trump's real motive is and to learn whether he is really seeking a deal or if his administration has rented out its foreign policy to a few countries to create chaos, instability, and economic collapse in Iran.
In the meantime, Washington and Jerusalem are using the crisis to appeal directly to the Iranian people to stand up to the regime.
While it is ultimately up to the Iranian people to determine the direction of their country, the United States, in the spirit of our own freedoms, will support the long-ignored voice of the Iranian people. Our hope is that ultimately the regime will make meaningful changes in its behavior, both inside of Iran and globally.
George Thomas, CBN News.
Turkey is another Middle East player in a standoff with the U.S. It's over the fate of arrested U.S. pastor Brunson, held on charges of espionage. Middle East expert Robert Spencer spoke with CBN's senior international correspondent Gary Lane about the situation in Turkey.
Let's talk about Erdogan. He says the U.S. risks losing a sincere partner if it imposes sanctions, because he won't free Pastor Brunson, of course. He says Turkey will explore options. So how sincere is Erdogan, and what are these options he's talking about?
He hasn't been a sincere partner in years. He's been working to re-Islamize Turkey. It's very clear, as many of his opponents on all sides of the political spectrum have charged, that he wants to restore the Ottoman Caliphate. He has declared that the lands that once belonged to the Ottoman Caliphate, such as the whole Eastern Mediterranean area, North Africa, Greece, they all belong by right to Turkey. And it seems as if he ultimately wants to undertake military adventurism to get them back. The Turks are constantly harassing Greek planes and ships in the Aegean. And so this is supposed to be a NATO ally, a NATO partner. He has not been that for many years. He was buying ISIS oil when ISIS was in control of 60 Iraqi oil wells. And so for him to say now, in connection with Pastor Brunson, that we're risking losing a reliable ally is plain deception. Turkey has not been an ally for a long time.
Let's look a little bit more at that on concerning ISIS. Now, I know from my time in the Middle East, many people have said that he's been a staunch supporter of ISIS for a long time. So how extensive has his support been for ISIS? Is he still supporting the group?
Well, ISIS, of course, has lost most of its territory in Iraq and Syria. And so while, yes, he still supports the group, it's not as important as it used to be when ISIS controlled a territory larger than Great Britain. But yes, he did support them, and this is because ISIS was fighting against Assad and the Kurds. And it seemed to be that Erdogan was working for the long term. What he wanted to do was have ISIS take out Assad and the Kurds, and then he could incorporate ISIS into a renewed Turkish caliphate.
Seems like he really has a longing to control that northern part of Syria.
Oh, yes.
Is ISIS making a comeback? And what about Al-Qaeda?
It's certainly not gone altogether, but it's substantially weakened. I don't think that it's in a position to recover the territory that it once controlled. But certainly it's not gone. We shouldn't think that the job is completely done there by any means.
Are they a threat, or is Al-Qaeda still the greater threat?
Oh, I would say ISIS is still very much the greater threat, partly because they've lost so much territory in Iraq and Syria, and they have internationalized. They've been working not only in Afghanistan and Libya, but also the Philippines and elsewhere around the world. Of course, also, and I think probably of most concern to people in the United States, is the fact that they have called repeatedly upon Muslims in the U.S., in Canada, and in countries of Western Europe to mount lone wolf jihad attacks. And with the dispersal of many of their foreign fighters. Remember that in their heyday, they had attracted 30,000 foreign fighters from 100 different countries. And a lot of those jihadis have returned to their homes in Western Europe and even in the United States. I don't think they ever should have been let in. They were enemy combatants who had joined a state that was in a state of war with the United States. But they were let back in, and so I think that it's virtually certain we have not heard the last from them.
Okay, Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch, author of the new book, The History of Jihad, From Muhammad to ISIS. Thank you, Robert, for joining us.
Up next, CBN founder Pat Robertson is honored with an award also given to President Trump as a special friend of Zion. Dr. Mike Evans founded the Friends of Zion Museum in Jerusalem 3 years ago. He wanted to honor Christian heroes who helped the Jewish people and the State of Israel. Evans has presented an award to several world leaders who stand with Israel, and recently he surprised CBN founder Pat Robertson with the award during the 700 Club.
Why is it so important to tell these stories of Christian Friends of Zion?
Heroes in history, the ability to confront evil is only determined by the inspiration you draw from your heroes in history. Pat had a hero, Corrie ten Boom.
That's right.
That's our work in Holland. I restored her home in '88.
Praise God.
I'm the chairman of the board. Well, if you don't have heroes in history, when you're confronted with evil, you'll cave in.
Yeah.
You'll cave in.
The Friends of Zion Museum has given a special award to past presidents, to current president,
yes,
to other great heads of state. Tell us about that award.
Well, let's see the award. You have it here. I
do. I want to see it.
The award. This award was commissioned by the 9th President of Israel, Shimon Peres, and it's to celebrate Christian leaders who are defenders of the Jewish people. The menorah, God Almighty commissioned the menorah. He told Moses to put it in the tabernacle.
That's right.
Then it was in the temple. And of course, it's the seal of the State of Israel and of the Jewish people back from the beginning of time. And of course, they put the pure oil in the menorah, and it's a symbol of the Holy Spirit. Well, the last one who received it was Donald Trump in the Oval Office with most of the evangelical leaders. But today, the recipient of the Friends of Zion Award is Pat Robertson.
Yay! Woo! Awesome!
I wasn't expecting this.
I wanted it to be a surprise.
Well, it is.
For more than 50 years, there's no man on the planet in America who has been a greater defender of the Jewish people in the State of Israel than Pat Robertson. You've mobilized millions of Christian supporters. Right. What you've done for the nation of Israel is legendary. So it's my honor, Pat, to present you with the same award that President Donald Trump received, President George Bush, Prince Albert of Monaco, and many world leaders. God bless you, my brother.
Mike, this is a great
careful,
honor.
You have to hold it by the bottom.
It's a little bit heavy.
It is, yeah. That's beautiful. That is, that's a menorah.
Gorgeous. That is incredible.
Yes. Well, I'm so honored to receive this. This is a great thrill for me.
You can
Thank
put it
you.
here on the table if you like, so we can get a good shot of it.
That's beautiful. I will put it in a place of honor and be thankful for it.
When I presented to the president, I said, and the vice president was there, and Ivanka and Jared, and I said, you know, it's a symbol of divine inspiration and light.
Yeah.
And I believe with all my heart, Pat, that when you began this ministry, you made a commitment to bless the Jewish people in the nation of Israel. Right. And that's why I believe God's blessed CBN so greatly.
Without question.
Yeah.
Without question. And, you know, I swore whatever happened in the world, however unpopular it would be, that we would stand with Israel, come what may. And God has honored that.
Yes, he has.
Yeah.
Coming up, a look at the history of CBN's longtime connection with Israel and its people. CBN has long dedicated itself to supporting Israel, and on the day that CBN was making a major step forward, prophecy was being fulfilled inside the walls of Jerusalem. Take a look.
In June of 1967, Israel found itself fighting for survival for the third time in less than 20 years. And now what's known as the Six-Day War, Israel's Arab enemies fought with one purpose: the destruction of the Jewish state. And half a world away from the besieged nation, God was raising up a friend.
We dedicated the start of construction of a new phase of our building in Portsmouth, and the ceremony was over when one of our board members came and said, "They've just started war in Israel." Something just responded within me. I knew this had enormous significance, that we at CBN were linked with Israel, and that this had to do with the last time. It had to do with the fulfillment of the prophecy that Jesus made when he said, "Jerusalem will be trodden underfoot of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled." This was the war that liberated East Jerusalem.
The peace did not last, however. In 1973, Egypt and Syria attacked again, this time on Yom Kippur, Israel's holiest day of the year. An unprepared Israel almost lost that war, and the high casualty rate left many in the country disillusioned. A 1974 CBN special brought a message of hope to a war-weary nation.
It became so obvious to every one of us in this country that the threat was to the very existence of the newly born Jewish state.
Here was the general, actually, under Moshe Dayan, who had captured Jerusalem. Now he'd become prime minister. But I had a sense that Israel was so alone. There was a sadness in his voice. He asked America to be strong. And at that point, I made a vow that whatever happened, however unpopular it would be, that we and those associated with us would stand with Israel, that we would be the friend of Israel, regardless. And over these 30, 35 years, I've kept that vow.
3 years later, CBN dedicated its satellite Earth station. As a preview of things to come, the first satellite image received came from the Mount of Olives. Since then, the alliance between CBN and Israel has only grown stronger. In 2001, a news bureau opened in the heart of Jerusalem to bring a prophetic understanding of end-time events.
The march of history is leading back to the city of Jerusalem, and it's vital for CBN News to be here reporting on the events before the return of Jesus Christ.
At Pat Robertson's 75th birthday celebration in 2005, Benjamin Netanyahu sent a stirring thank you to Pat for his friendship to Israel.
Pat Robertson has been a magnificent friend of Israel, and he's been a personal friend of mine. I felt that we had no greater friend in the world, and I mean that. We have no greater friend in the world than Pat Robertson.
In August of 2006, Pat traveled to Israel during the war to demonstrate his support.
I'm here, among other things, to tell your people that the evangelical Christians of America are with you. We're praying for you.
We pray for the nation of Israel.
CBN also has shown its humanitarian commitment to those living in Israel. Through Operation Blessing and Eli Israel, CBN has helped Israelis in need, including survivors of the Holocaust. CBN News now sends Jerusalem Dateline, an award-winning half-hour weekly program, around the world through broadcast and the internet, where it's translated into languages like Korean and Finnish. And In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem is the most ambitious project of CBN's Middle East documentary team, with more specials on the way. CBN's ties to Israel remain strong and steadfast, and we will be there to report the prophetic events that herald the day of the Messiah's return.
This is the land that the Lord is going to visit. He's coming back again to Israel.
Just ahead, Jerusalem hosts the International Children's Games. The Jerusalem municipality hosted the largest children's sporting event in the world this summer. Here's a look at what you can find on our social media platforms.
It's really bonding. We actually get to know the countries. We can actually see the best swimmers swim in young ages.
That's all for this edition. Thanks for joining us. And remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And remember, the God that's watching over Israel and you and me neither slumbers nor sleeps. I'm Julie Stahl. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.